Beatrix Potter. I was born Helen Beatrix Potter on July 28, 1844 in Kensington, England. My family was very wealthy. We lived in a nice home. We had a lot of servants. My parents loved me dearly, but they really didn't want to play with me very much. So I led a very lonely childhood. I didn't have another sibling until I was 5 years old, so I spent most of my time with the servants. I also had a really big love for animals, so I would catch rabbits and mice and keep them in my room for pets. I also had a rabbit that I called Peter Piper, and I would lead him on a leash around the neighborhood on walks, and the neighbors thought this was really a little odd. Peter used to lie before the fire on a hearthrug like a cat. He was clever at learning tricks. He learned to jump through a hoop and ring a bell, and he played the tambourine. I modeled the character Peter Rabbit in all of my books after my first rabbit, Peter Piper. When my brother was born, before that, I had a nanny that was named Mackenzie, and I loved Mackenzie. When Bert came along, my parents decided that Mackenzie was more important to him than he was to me, so Mackenzie went with Bert, and I had a governess named Annie Moore. I was a little resentful at first, but I grew to love Annie so much that after a while it didn't matter very much. I loved being outdoors when I was a child. My favorite childhood memories were visiting my auntie and uncle in Wales, and my brother Bert and I would go all over the place. We'd look at all of the flowers and the wildlife, and we'd collect all sorts of animals to bring home. We would bring rabbits and mice and salamanders, and one time my mom was so mad, we even brought a bat home so that we could play with it. I liked to study them, and I liked to study the plants that were in the area, and I liked to sketch them as well. My governess, Annie, noticed that I had real talent for drawing, so she approached my father and asked if I could have art lessons, and he said yes, so I had my very first art lessons where I learned how to draw. Some of my influences in my art were the Pre-Raphaelites. They were really concerned with the accuracy of the pictures, but they weren't very concerned with the foreground, and they always shadowed it and made it in shades. But I didn't want to draw like that. I wanted to make everything precise and everything look how it looked in real life. I was also influenced by an artist called Caldecott, and he liked to use minimal lines, and I used that with my drawings of Peter Rabbit. That he was a very big influence on me. I did all of the illustrations for my books as well as the writing. When I was a child, I developed my own alphabet by using pictures instead of words, so it was like my own little secret code, and in fact I used to keep a diary, and I kept it until I was 30, and instead of writing in regular phonetic letters, I would write in the letters that I created my picture letters, so that no one else could read my diary except for me. When I became older, I would do drawings and pictures for children that are close to me. When my former governess, Annie Moore, when her child was sick with rheumatic fever, I wrote the story Peter Rabbit for him to cheer him up. And after I created a few of these books, my friends looked at my stories and they said, you know, Beatrix, you really need to publish these books. So I went to all of the different publishing houses and I gave them copies of my books, but everyone turned me down. But I was a strong, determined woman, so I decided, you know what? I don't care. I'm publishing my own books. So I went and I made 450 copies of Peter Rabbit, and I gave them out to my friends. And one of the publishers that turned me down previously, he saw one of my copies of Peter Rabbit, and he was so impressed with the quality of the artwork and the quality of the writing that he asked if he could publish the book for me. So I let him, and that was the start of my literary career. Sorry, after a while, I didn't really marry. I was a very lonesome person because of how I grew up, that I stayed at home mostly, but eventually I met a man named William Keelis, and he was a solicitor and he captured my heart, and we became married when I was already 47 years old. By that time, I was okay with my books. I didn't really want to do anything else. I wanted to stay closer to nature, and I wanted to be more involved with conservancy and raising money to help preserve the landscape so that other little girls and boys could go out and enjoy the flowers and the wildlife and the animals that I enjoyed when I was a child. So I pretty much gave up my writing and became a farmer. My neighbors, they never knew that I was Beatrix Potter. To them, I was just Mrs. William Keelis, the sheep farmer. So I finished out my days living on the farm, raising sheep, raising rabbits, and you would see me usually going through the fields with a stick and a lunch bag slung across my shoulders. Eventually I owned 14 farms and I farmed 4,000 acres of land. On December 22nd, 1942, I died a very happy woman, but after a bout with bronchitis that greatly weakened me, I passed away. Many of my letter books, correspondence sketches, manuscripts, and photographs are on permanent display in the Victoria and Albert Museum in Kensington, where I spent many wonderful hours as a child. It was for all of you that I wrote my little books. These stories have been translated into 35 languages and sold over 100 million copies around the world. Children everywhere read about my friends. Someday, if you are feeling bored or lonely, perhaps if you read my little stories, my friends will put a smile on your face, just like they did for me.